Hi, I'm Spencer Grendall, and welcome to the Spencer Grendall Show. We have a very exciting show for you today. We are returning to a theme of a past show, an archaeological show, and Randy Kopang, our guest today, and I explored in our past show a mystery about huge blocks in a temple in Baalbek in Lebanon. And we went on the web and we looked through all the museums on the web and we downloaded pictures from the web and we just worked very hard and got a lot of stuff. And it was a mystery because we have these large stones, and how did this happen? These are bigger than stones in Egypt, but similar in certain ways and yet different. And Randy got so excited that he bought a ticket to Lebanon, took a cameraman, and hightailed it there. Not only go to Lebanon, he went to Egypt. So we have a two-part show, Anomalies to the Temple of the Sun. And what we mean by anomalies here is unusual things that we with modern science, or with what we now know about ancient science, cannot explain how certain things happened. That there are like clues to a greater mystery. Now, Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Spencer.
And tell us about this incredible journey. How did you get excited and take off to Lebanon?
Well, yes, indeed. In our previous program, which was exactly a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I felt that actually, to clarify a point, we did attempt to dig up as much information on the site of Baalbek specifically as we could on the web, and we found quite a bit of, shall we say, more mundane perceptions of what the site represents, but we found very little evidence and not very much photographic evidence, shall we say, especially in that sense, that showed exactly what has been described in a number of books that have come out, that are books devoted to revisionist history. Well, there's a number of people, and more of them all the time, writing books and doing a lot of very good research that have felt that the perceptions of the past as held by the Orthodox academia have basically understated a lot of artifacts that are there throughout the world, and kind of arbitrarily decided that they were insignificant, and so therefore they didn't include them in their overview of what history suggests as far as perhaps technological developments in the ancient past, and then how these artifacts played a role in both the cultural and spiritual lives of the people of the past. And what happened with me was I got enamored with this one particular site, especially this one at Baalbek, because I noticed that there wasn't a lot of photographic evidence that was described in some of these books, such as by Zacharias Sitchin in his book, another guy named Alan Alford.
Right. Well, I want one thing before we jump to Lebanon. Now, when you say revision, let me say, in other words, you say, what is the motivation? You're saying that certain historical writers are now kind of like
they're breaking
skipping
the mold
over and not really analyzing this evidence. Is there a motivation why they wouldn't want to face this evidence head on?
The Orthodox people, you mean? Well, in terms of the new authors, they're feeling that the old mold of historical reckoning has to be broken, the mold of that, and because basically it has developed into a dogmatic bias in terms of how to analyze and interpret history. So these new people on the scene are just carrying on in the tradition of basically reevaluating what we know as people about the human family, the history of the human family, basically. And this has always been done. There's no reason to believe that just because a history has been kind of like institutionalized in the way that it's being taught, that we should take it for face value, that there's nothing more to determine. That's hardly the case.
Yes.
And so that's why there's so many people going back into the sites themselves, in actual fact by visitation, and looking around and seeing if there's something there to develop new ideas around. And so that's especially the case at Baalbek. And I'm going to show you some films that we took.
Well, tell us about your journey, then we'll show the film. Now, you took off from LAX. How did you get there?
Yeah, we flew actually directly to Lebanon. Baalbek is in Lebanon. It's in north central Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley. And we had no trouble going there.
And you went with a cameraman, and you brought back some video.
Yeah.
You want to give me background on this video, or we want to look at it and have you talk over it? How do you want to work this?
Well, what I thought I'd do was, in terms of furthering my research as background material for this film clip we will show, I will perhaps read or elaborate some ideas about the history of the site to show that there is there is a degree of continuity with respect to the history that's written about the site and the anomalies that we're going to describe. And primarily that focuses on the two walls of a temple there, which was built by the Romans, beginning around, I believe it was begun in around 60 BC and continued to be built for approximately 300 years. It was never completely a fully realized architectural construction. But the remarkable thing, as you see right here, these blocks in the middle, the Romans built upon these blocks, the large ones there. And you can see the lack of continuity in the foundation stones of this wall. Very clearly, it was as if the smaller blocks at the far right and at the top were added on.
Yes, you can see that very clearly.
Now, the history of these blocks that you see go back into time immemorial. And as a matter of fact, I'll read from a book written by the curator of this site for 37 years, named Michael Aloof. He says that the tradition states that the fortress of Baalbek, this is not the fortress, this is the temple, known as the Temple of Jupiter, built by the Romans generally, that's what it's known as. But the tradition states in the town, in the area, in Lebanon, that the fortress at Baalbek, which is nearby on Mount Lebanon, is the most ancient building in the world and was built by Cain, son of Adam, in the year 133 of the creation.
Wow.
And, and then another...
Now this is another example here of the above is the Romans, and the kind of the rough stuff is the old, going back to the time of Cain.
Well,
that's pretty far back.
That's what the tradition says.
I mean, that's the Adam and Eve. Of course, I don't believe it.
And the revisionist historians are going back and saying, let's listen to these traditions and give some serious consideration to why these people say these things, and not presume that they've just made it up or created a myth for the sake of creating one, right?
Now, is this that big? The big
these blocks in
that one's the one.
The ones on the very top,
right?
they're known as the trilithon,
trilithon?
And they weigh over 1,100 tons. So the remarkable anomaly is that how these could have been moved.
1,100 tons, one block.
Precisely. You can see how precise they're mounted there.
Look at that stuff. That's amazing.
Exactly. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that the history shows that into time immemorial, this site has been recognized as, in one way or another, in one form or another, being constructed in this site. And it goes back actually into the whole story of Genesis. So there's a man who's still alive, whose name is Christian O'Brien, who's been basically doing a process of analysis both in terms of etymology and philology of the ancient texts left by the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Akkadians and pre-biblical texts by the Hebrews, and coming to the conclusion that the history that's accounted in all these ancient texts is basically a history that includes this site, but not the temple that's built above these giant blocks.
Not this Roman addition.
No.
That's being pointed out by the finger. That's the Roman addition up there.
Right. That's relatively modern. In fact, the parts that you're seeing now were actually a reassemblage of the blocks actually after it was torn down by the Arabs, and they rebuilt it to fortify it and use it as a fortress. But these blocks here are totally anomalous and inconsistent with the apparent building that you see there on the left now. And so we're trying to evaluate that in terms of a history that's not academically acceptable. It's outside the parameter of an ancient view that anomalous things, namely the movement of such blocks. I mean, we've looked into this to the degree of talking with engineers and crane operators that move large blocks to tell you that if you expected primitive people to do this all by hand it would have been virtually impossible because there's no way you can maneuver blocks that weigh hundreds and hundreds of tons. I mean, it's staggering just to imagine how much these things weigh. But as you can see here, me coming through this doorway, now this is on...
How far were they from the site where they were quarried?
The quarry where they believe most of the blocks that you see everywhere, both used by the Romans and these, come approximately a mile away only. But nonetheless, we're talking at a time wherein they didn't have the wheel, right? This predates that kind of technology by actually thousands of years. So people like Christian O'Brien are going back in there into the history of the Sumerians, and identifying localities, namely this very region that can be very undoubtedly identified with the story of Genesis and the story as told by Enoch in the book of Enoch, one of the books of the Old Testament left out of the Old Testament. And you could identify that this site of Baalbek actually was a settlement area within what came to be known as the Garden of Eden region of the Middle East. And what Christian O'Brien has done is shown that Baalbek was a site...
That's you standing on that rock,
That's
right?
in front of me. That's proportional. You can see those blocks there are about 14 feet tall.
Wow.
But you can see that they're truly monumental and, as they say, cyclopean. And there's a lot of them as well. There's not just a few of them. So whoever designed this decided arbitrarily that there was no problem with doing it, and maybe in terms of economy or who knows what the purpose was for the original construction, although there is a hypothesis, but we don't have time to go into that. Now, right now, we're viewing right in the center there. You can see some columns in the far distance. That's the temple where we just were. This is the quarry where these blocks came from. Now, this block right here is the largest of all blocks.
Look at that block.
Yeah, the estimate weight of that one is...
Why is it just sticking there? They get interrupted in their building?
Perhaps 1,500 tons.
Whoa, here come the Pleiadians to attack you.
Yeah, now in two books that I have on this site, it actually states, this is not a revisionist supposition, that there was a place for it at the site, and there was every intention of moving it over there, but for whatever unknown reason they did not. So it's not a hypothetical that this block was going to be used as such. They actually say that in the histories, that it was very likely to be used.
Give us the length and give us the dimensions of this stone.
I think this is 72 feet long, and I think that's more or less 14 or 15 feet square. It's not the only one, however, and one of the new things that we discovered was that over the hill, not found in any books or any websites, there was another block approximately the same size, and we're going to show that here now. This is actually, you know, a few hundred yards away to the north, and there it is.
And it's been cut up a little bit by
yeah, there was a little bit of it looks like they might have been attempting to you know,
take some of the
carve it up into smaller pieces or whatever.
Make some bricks.
It's cyclopean, just like the other one.
Wow, that is huge.
And very remarkable, yeah. So the question is, why would people build with such large building materials that would seemingly be so illogical to use, given the size and the magnitude of what it would take to move them? The gravitational forces alone on such objects would seemingly preclude them getting it over there in one piece without killing anybody in the process. And yet, not only did they do it, they did it with expert precision when they placed them in there. That's what's remarkable, and so that's the anomaly we want to deal with. This is the kind of thing that motivates a lot of people who are going into various areas, such as Stonehenge, such as places in Peru, Tiwanaku, and perhaps even the pyramids in Central America as well. That something was known by the ancient peoples that actually makes them not primitive people. In some way, they may be comparatively primitive in more cultural ways, but in terms of technology, what they knew about astronomy, various things like that, they apparently were much more sophisticated than even we are today.
What's the conjecture about how this, what's his name, this Finn?
Latvian, Mr. Lieskellen. Basically, he actually published a few monographs, or one in particular that I know of, and a few other little small articles, that he had a theory of relativity, shall we say, about the nature of matter itself, and that apparently led him to the realization that he came to, that you can maneuver matter if you understand more about the nature of its quantum properties. In other words, the magnetic properties of the atoms, the structural atomic essence of any given material. And if you understand enough about that, you can in some way alter it to such a way that it can be maneuvered as if it didn't weigh as much as it did, and therefore in some way, shall we say, violate the forces of gravity. But perhaps gravity is not what we think.
Well, you know, when I was at Brown, there was a graduate student that I ran around with for a while, a crazy guy, and he was really into Tibet. And he was convinced that you could get a group, now you're talking about one man, he was convinced that you could get a group of people and take a tone. And with a tone, you could actually come by a tone to the tone of this mass. So if you got your tone of monks, you know, and you keep working on the tone of that mass, that when you hit the tone of the mass's gravity is released for a moment, and it's like a balloon, and they would just float these things up. He was convinced of this, and it was very interesting to talk with him, because it is a very captivating idea that, that the mind itself is in fact the most powerful tool on the planet.
Right, as in the aphorism, mind over matter. Well, I've heard that theory specifically related to the situation you just described myself. And as a matter of fact, there's no reason why not to consider that as a serious possibility, because science, in the orthodox sense, has in fact been pursuing the paranormal. And they don't highly publicize the fact that they have been researching it, but they have for actually quite a few decades now. And the truth is that the term mind over matter is not an overestimation of the possibility that those people, and we're talking about Tibetan monks who are rather adept at what would be very remarkable feats of the control of the mind, you know, in conjunction with control and understanding of the spirit more. And it's perfectly within the realm of possibility. Now, for the rational skeptic, since they haven't seen it done, then they would be inclined to not even to consider it as a possibility. But what I'm saying is that the revisionist historians that are coming up and making their mark now in more or less revising and redefining the history that we've known, they are open-minded enough to consider such things in light of the type of thing that we see at Baalbek, in light of the thing that we see on the Giza Plateau.
Let me get it this way. A lot of people in the marginal community that goes to these expos and things that we all love to get all of our knowledge about a lot of things that are kind of crazy, but some of them are obviously probably going to be true. The question is, since we have this character who did this, this would kind of take the pressure off us looking at an extraterrestrial. But it could bring us to a group of men, or like just before we started the show, I was talking about in the Bible, Abraham at the the beginning when he first was separating himself from the rest of the tribe and starting his own belief in God and his own little tribe of Judea, he went to a place to have a meeting with these giants. Huge men, of which finally David and Goliath is probably one of the remnant stories of this group of men. The question would be, and we're running out of time in this for this part, but could it also have been that it was a group of people who, for one reason or another, they're not recorded in history, but we have whispers of them in the Bible, and we have whispers of them in Chaldea, and we have some whispers of this group of people in Egyptology?
Well, as a matter of fact, in this same book that I quoted earlier by the former curator at Baalbek for 37 years, he actually quotes one of the other traditions that actually also names the giants that you're referring to, that figured prominently in the, shall we say, the oral traditional history, according to various peoples in the area, that includes them within the tradition. And so what we're trying to say is that we shouldn't disregard this term. Now, perhaps giants is a metaphorical thing for for a level of intelligence in beings or people that would be seemingly anti-evolutionary in the sense that perhaps people were more evolved in various levels of human potential than we would have expected based on the mechanical model of, you know, apes becoming human-like and then becoming human, and then we make a great leap and we have this great intellectual capacity. Really what the revisionist history is suggesting is that actually the potential for human development has exceeded where we are today, but many thousands of years into the past.
Yes, and let's take this as the next step to the next show.
Okay.
And we looked at what was a temple at Baalbek, Baal being one of the gods of the sun and the wind, and played a very real part in the Old Testament as well. As they worshiped Baal when Moses came back down, and now we have this temple in Lebanon that we've looked at, these huge stones of 1,100
1,100 tons.
1,100 tons.